Crime shows on TV will often use some strange techniques to try to find the criminal or some unusual piece of evidence which would be questionable in court in real life. Sometimes real life can be stranger than fiction though, and criminals are caught in ways which seem crazy. Number 5. In June of 2017, several families in Kent woke up to find their living rooms ransacked and their possessions stolen. Most of the victims were elderly, and one had to be taken to the hospital for shock, fearing she was having a heart attack. One couple found out that more than possessions had been taken away from them. A pair of oxygen tanks used by the wife to help her breathe had been stolen, and Rocky, an African gray parrot who'd been part of the family for more than 20 years, was missing. 5 robberies had taken place in a single night, all in the early hours of the morning. It came only a few days after another robbery in a nearby street. However, the criminal had bitten off more than he could chew when he tried to take Rocky. Rocky had tried to fight back and had bitten the criminal's hand as he tried to escape. When police arrived, they found a significant amount of blood believed to be from the thief. They suspected the criminal had thrown Rocky out the window when he realized the parrot wasn't as easy a target as he had hoped. The blood gave police DNA to analyze, and thankfully, it didn't take long before they found a match. It belonged to a man named Vitaly Kislyov. Kislyov was a Lithuanian man who'd recently been released from prison after being convicted of another burglary. He'd also been in prison for a number of robberies in Lithuania. Fingerprints at the scenes of the burglaries linked them together. Given he'd stolen an iPhone and a bank card in another robbery, it seemed unlikely Kislyov would have been able to get away with his crimes for very long. But Rocky's resistance to his own thief meant police didn't need to wait for Kislyov to try to use his ill-gotten gains before they could identify him. Kislyov didn't do much to hide from the police, and he was arrested the following day. He confessed to his crimes and was jailed for 4 years. Most of the belongings were recovered, and a social media plea by the couple's daughter meant Rocky was safely returned not long after Kislyov was caught. Number 4. There have been a number of films and TV shows where tattoos are used to crack crimes, but rarely does this happen in real life. Most criminals try to hide their crimes, not leaving behind clues that investigators can sometimes use to solve or help prevent a crime. So investigators were pretty surprised when they came across a tattoo that gave a detailed depiction of an unsolved gang-related murder. At a very young age, Anthony Garcia joined the Los Angeles street gang Riviera 13, and he was still a teenager when he committed his first murder in 2004. Garcia and another member of the gang took the life of John Juarez with a spray of bullets as he stood outside of a liquor store on January 23rd of that year. Juarez was a member of the Pico Nuevo gang, whose members their rivals insultingly called Peanuts. The case quickly went cold, and it would remain that way for 4 years. Garcia was seemingly undeterred by his first murder and continued to be an active member of the gang. Over the years, he was arrested for a number of minor offenses, but it was never enough to keep him off the street for very long. At the same time, Garcia was getting some extensive tattoos. These included a man with a bandana over his mouth pointing a gun, and another man holding an image of Mr. Peanut in a chokehold with a dagger pointed at their head. The most detailed of these images showed a helicopter attacking another Mr. Peanut in front of a liquor store. As the tattoo had been done in stages, police didn't figure out what it depicted the first few times they saw it. At first, it was just a helicopter and Mr. Peanut. The second time he was arrested, Garcia had added the liquor store in the background. Despite Garcia's arrogance, he wasn't connected to the 2004 murder. But finally, in 2008, he was arrested for driving with a suspended license. By this point, the tattoo was complete. As is often the case with active gang members, police took photos of the tattoo as well as his mugshot. An investigator looking into another case with the same gang came across the photo and noticed its striking resemblance to the 2004 murder. Even the details like the trajectory of the bullets were accurate. Garcia, whose nickname in the gang was Chopper, was arrested and while awaiting trial confessed to officers undercover as gang members. He was found guilty and sentenced to 65 years in prison. Number 3. Even the nearly untouched forests of the northern US are not immune to crimes, or to people who share too much information on social media. It was January 2015 when a park warden was investigating reports of fuel theft at Pierce Pond in Maine. While there, he discovered cooking equipment from a sport camp that was missing and contacted police. The campsite was located near the Appalachian Trail and was popular for its nearly untouched wilderness. But one of the biggest draws was the local wildlife. Given the focus of the wildlife, conserving it was very important, and trail cameras had been set up around the area so rangers could monitor the animals from a distance. A few of these cameras covered the area of the campsite. It didn't take long for police to find images of the man responsible for stealing the propane cook stove and cast iron wooden stove. Along with other evidence collected from the site, police were able to identify the man in the photos as Christopher Wallace. When they searched Wallace's home, they found one of the stolen stoves and information about the sale of the second stove, which was quickly located. Wallace himself wasn't as easy to find. Initial reports indicated that he left Maine entirely, but as the weeks passed by, Wallace began to get cocky. He posted on Snapchat that he was hiding in his home from police, apparently believing nobody on his friends list would go to the police. But he was very wrong. Police received a number of tip-offs and were permitted to search the house again. When they got there, they found Erica Ward, a young woman who also lived at the house. She said she hadn't heard from Wallace since the burglary and allowed officers inside to search. At first, it looked like this story checked out as police found no sign of Wallace. But as they were beginning to wrap up the search, the officers got more calls. While they were in the house, Wallace had posted on Snapchat again, telling his friends the police were looking for him and he was hiding in a cabinet. Following the tips, police searched the kitchen cabinets where Wallace was hiding. Both Wallace and Ward were arrested, and police thanked the local community for their support. Number 2. Blanche Kimball was last seen alive on Memorial Day, 1976, painting the steps outside of her home. She was 70 years old and a retired nurse who was known to occasionally take in boarders from time to time. It took a few weeks, but eventually neighbors noticed they hadn't seen Blanche out since Memorial Day, and someone seems to have called to request a welfare check. When police arrived, they found Blanche's body in her kitchen, already beginning to decompose. She'd suffered multiple stab wounds to her chest and defensive wounds to her hands and arms. The weapon was nowhere to be found. Gary Wilson, a man in his 20s who was Blanche's lodger at the time, came under suspicion and was questioned. Wilson denied any involvement in her death, and police couldn't find any evidence to link him to the crime. The case went cold and was quickly forgotten about. Wilson was never taken off the police radar for very long, though. At some point, he traveled from Maine to Washington, where he ended up homeless. He'd had repeated run-ins with the law, though it was never serious enough for any lengthy prison stay, and his DNA was never put into a police database. This wasn't much of an issue for him at the time, as police believed the only DNA evidence they had obtained from the crime scene had come from Blanche herself. It turned out this wasn't the case, however. The case was always left open, and in 2011, police reanalyzed evidence taken from the scene. It was discovered that some of the blood recovered didn't belong to Blanche and actually appeared to have come from a man. It seemed whoever had attacked Blanche had likely been hurt in the scuffle, though it probably wasn't enough to be noticeable at the time. Wilson was still the most likely suspect. Despite having no fixed address and going by the name Gary Robb, it didn't take police long to track him down due to his previous run-ins with the law. However, getting the DNA to prove Robb had committed the crime wasn't as easy. Rather than arresting him without it, police went undercover as researchers conducting a chewing gum survey. What exactly the survey entailed hasn't been released, but Robb was paid $5 to participate and gave the researchers the now used gum. Robb's DNA matched the blood found at the crime scene, and Robb was arrested. At first, he didn't confess, and his defense team tried to pin the blame on a gardener who'd found the knife that may have been used to take Blanche's life, but eventually Robb pleaded guilty and spent the rest of his life in prison. Number 1. Edward Lambert was a wealthy businessman who had some $5 billion in assets under his management. He ran an investment company, but himself invested in only a small handful of companies, including AutoZone Inc., where he was the largest shareholder. The money allowed him to live a good lifestyle, but also attracted unwanted attention. On January 10, 2003, he was walking back to his car at the end of a long day at the office. As he unlocked the car door, a group of thugs grabbed him and shoved him into the back seat of their own car. He was handcuffed, blindfolded, and driven to a secret location where he would spend the next 28 hours scared for his life. There were 4 attackers total. At first, they sounded like a professional gang, and Edward was told they'd been hired as a hitman by an unnamed official at AutoZone. They would be paid $3 million for taking Edward's life, but if he was willing to pay more, they could possibly come to an arrangement. As the ordeal went on, the gang became more and more unprofessional. At one point, the ringleader told his friends he was having a bad day, which didn't fill Edward with hope that he was going to get out of this unharmed. They would regularly put a shotgun to his head, letting him know that they were serious. Edward was eventually able to negotiate his release for $5 million and was driven by the ringleader to a location where he was released. Instead of going to collect the money though, Edward unsurprisingly went to the police. This wasn't the first mistake the criminals had made during this time. While Edward was tied up, they'd used his credit card to purchase items. At first, this went unnoticed, but as Edward was being driven to his release, the 3 thugs who stayed behind ordered pizza. This was flagged by the bank's fraud department. Police arrived not long after the pizza and they were arrested. One of the group also told his girlfriend and her friend about their actions while Edward was still being kept a prisoner, only adding the evidence against them. The ringleader turned out to be a man named Ronaldo Rose, a former Marine who had been honorably discharged with medals for marksmanship and his good conduct. He was intelligent and had done copious amounts of research on his victim. The story about being hired as a hitman was false. After he dropped Edward off, he realized his plan had gone wrong and went on the run. However, given he was such a high-profile target, he didn't last long, and 5 days later he was arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.